Fly fishing for wild river brown trout is a relaxing sport. Using light rods and minimal tackle, anglers can cover considerable distances of river, looking for areas where they think fish may be holding. By studying the flow and depth of the river, or noticing where boulders or bushes may provide cover for trout, the angler can then predict where fish may be lying and feeding. In milder weather conditions, they may be rising to insects on the water surface, giving away both their location and what they're feeding on. Trout eat a diet of bugs, worms, and small fish. The bugs are more accurately known as invertebrates and are of interest to the fly fisher. This is because river brown trout fly fishing is basically a puzzle, where the angler must work out what artificial fly will fool a fish into thinking that it's a real food item. The occasional trout may grab any old artificial fly, especially when there is an increase in water levels. But to catch with regularity, this requires a knowledge of what they are eating. Salmon, sea trout and dolphin don't feed in rivers, but it's believed that they take a fly through curiosity, aggression, or as a feeding reflex. Therefore, it's not important to match the fly to a specific food that they would feed on. However, in trout fly fishing, it is an important factor. The artificial fly should be similar in size, colour and profile to the natural food that the trout is feeding on. This is called matching the hatch. Before an angler can do this, they need to be able to identify some of these invertebrates and then select fly patterns which represent them. River insects hatch from eggs and become nymphs. They live on the riverbed in gravel under rocks or on waterweed. Artificial nymphs are fished underwater, with most being fished close to the riverbed. They are usually weighted with heavy metal beads to get the fly down to the trout's feeding zone. Nymphs are part of the insect's life cycle, and when the time is right they hatch into an adult fly. These adult insects are represented by dry fly patterns, which are designed to float on the water surface. It should be noted that an artificial fly pattern is designed to represent the natural food form, rather than accurately imitate it. Some insects don't hatch from the river, but instead come from the land, and when these fall on the water, they are fed on by trout. These are called terrestrial flies. The fly fisher must be aware of what insects are in and around the river. A good fly fisher must also be able to cast the fly both delicately and accurately to the trout where it is feeding. This could be deep on the river bottom, mid-water, or on the surface. Fishing in bright sunlight and low water is difficult. Trout don't have eyelids, so they don't like to look into the bright sunlight. Overcast days, or days where there is an increase in river water levels, are much more productive. Treat fish with respect. Always wet your hands before handling fish, as dry hands remove the protective mucus from their bodies. Try to unhook your fish in the water. Keep fish out of the water for as little time as possible, and barbless hooks make releasing fish much easier. The angler must be stealthy, as trout are easily spooked, especially the bigger ones. So casting a line lightly on the water is important, as splashing line will usually make them bolt in a panic. Fish are very sensitive to noise in the water and vibration from riverbanks or rocks. So when in the water or walking down banks, tread softly. They also have great eyesight, so try to approach them from behind where they have a reduced field of vision. Brown trout usually hold up in places where there is a good depth or flow of water. They also like cover such as rocks or aquatic weeds, as these offer protection from predators. Ranunculus is a good fish-holding waterweed. A trout will take up residence in a good spot and will hold this position, intercepting the insects coming to it from upstream. The basic tackle setup should be a balanced rod outfit, which usually ranges from 3 to 5 weight, with a line which matches the rod. The higher the fly line weighting, the heavier it is. As river trout fishing requires stealth and delicate presentation, in most cases, the lighter the line, the better.
When we're going fly fishing for wild river brown trout, the basic setup that we'll require, obviously we're going to need a rod, which is a 9 foot, this rod, for a 3 to 5 weight line. AFTM 3 line will suit you for river trout. This line here is a 4 weight, which is ample. It can go to a 5 weight on a windier day, which will help for casting. We'll also need a reel, which stores the line, our fly line, which is this, and tippet line that then connects to the fly line.
It's obvious that artificial flies can't be tied directly onto the fly line, so a length of tippet material is tied to form a leader. The finer the leader, the better, as trout can reject flies tied on thicker tippet line when water is low and clear, as they can see it.
Our tippet, which comes in a spool like this, which we attach to the fly line, which then runs to our flies.
Tippet materials are measured in X, or in breaking strain. The higher the X number, the finer it is, and generally weaker. The higher the breaking strain in kilograms, the thicker the diameter of the tippet. To make sure that this thin tippet material does not break easily, there are several important fisherman's knots which should be learned, such as the half-blood knot.
Other things that are very necessary when you're fly fishing is a good pair of polarized sunglasses, which will help you in terms of protection for your eyes with a wayward fly, but also when you're wading, it'll help you see into the water and avoid obstructions.
Many instructors and guides suggest that the easiest way for a beginner to catch a trout is by using the geo method. This technique doesn't require the angler to be able to cast very far, and it is also quite visual. This involves tying a buoyant dry fly onto the leader, and this will be floating on the surface. A nymph is then tied below it with some tippet material or by tying a dropper from the main leader, with the length of tippet determined by what depth you think the trout may be feeding at. The dry fly is treated with floatant to make it more buoyant. When the line is cast upstream, the angler then watches the dry fly floating back downstream. There can be 2 ways the trout may intercept your flies. 1. The fly may disappear under the water. This means a trout has taken the submerged nymph. 2. The trout may rise to the surface and grab your dry fly. This could be very subtle, with almost a tiny suck or a splashy rise. But in any of these cases, quickly lift your rod once the fly disappears. This is called striking. You should try to avoid your dry fly from skidding on the water surface, as under most circumstances the trout will not be fooled. Dry fly fishing can provide the best sport as it is so visual. Ideally, when a fish is spotted, and once the angler has guessed the fly they are feeding on, a matching artificial fly is selected. This is tied onto 3 to 4 metres of tippet. A tapered leader is best as this helps with casting and presentation of the fly. The dry fly should have floatant applied unless it is made from a buoyant material such as CDC. In order to dry the fly while fishing, a few false casts help repel water. The angler approaches from behind. The fly is cast in front of where the fish is lying, and watch carefully as it floats back towards the fish. It should not be allowed to skate on the surface. The angler must also be in contact with the line, taking up slack line with the free hand. As in the previous method, the take may be subtle or splashy. Nymphing is a technique used when the angler assumes that the trout are feeding deeper, as there are no signs of fish rising. A team of 2-weighted nymphs are tied on a leader, and then they are fished deep where trout would expect nymphs to be, usually close to the riverbed. Casting is kept short and simple. It is important to hold the tip of the rod up in order to keep as much of the fly line off the water, and therefore minimise drag. Drag causes the nymphs to speed up, which looks unnatural. The line should be followed with the rod tip, and the leader watch for any movement or stopping, as this may be a take. If this happens, strike. It is important to fish the water methodically, making sure the nymphs cover new areas of fishy looking water each time you cast, as most trout won't travel much more than a metre to intercept a fly. Wet fly is a very traditional way of fishing for trout, and it is still effective, especially for sea trout and dolphin. This method, however, requires the angler to have the ability to cast longer lines. The angler can approach from upstream or downstream. Usually a couple of wet flies are fished subsurface on a leader of approximately 3 metres. These are cast at an angle across the river. The flies are allowed to swing around in the current, although some lifelike movement can be put into the flies by moving the rod tip. This time the take will be felt as the fish grabs the fly and then strike. River brown trout don't migrate like salmon or sea trout and are resident in the river from the start of the season to the end. For further information on rivers, permits and licences, visit DERA's website.